Hey everybody, John for Pioneer Nexus MTG here, coming at you with a couple of abbreviated deck guides and a little bit of gameplay for each of the top decks heading into the Pro Tour this coming weekend in Chicago, it obviously being a Pioneer format. So first up is Blue-White Control. Now Blue-White Control is a deck that we haven't covered a ton on the channel since the original deck guide, but not a whole lot of the deck has changed. I mean, it's still at its core, it's a Wandering Emperor, Teferi Hero of Dominaria control deck surrounded by fantastic sweepers, pretty good counter spells, and up until recently, kind of subpar removal. I mean, basically you were on Fateful Absence, March of Otherworldly Light. Sometimes you might see the 1-mana one that's kind of drawing a blank that was kind of a Swords to Plowshare-esque effect based on how the number of planes you ran. So you had some very, limited removal. Now that's been kind of fixed with the addition of Get Lost. Obviously Get Lost gives 2 map tokens, which can potentially draw more cards than, say, Fateful Absence, as that gives you 1 guaranteed draw, whereas this gives you 2 looks at lands, and a little bit of scry effects, if you can keep creatures on the battlefield. Beyond that, the newer addition to the deck is No More Lies. Now this is basically color-fixed mana leak with an XL effect attached to it. So blue and white, counter target spell unless its controller pays 3, and then if it gets put into a graveyard, you'd exile instead. So you get a little exile clause tagged onto it. The rest of the thing, Dovin's Veto is uncounterable negate basically. Omen of the Sea, this is something you only see generally in the Yorion builds, kind of helping to fill out the space. With the Yorion, giving you something to blink with Yorion, because otherwise you don't actually play a lot to take advantage of Yorion in the deck, other than the fact that it's a win con, temporary lockdown, kind of a necessary evil to run this one, especially in the face of Boros Convoke and Abzan Amalia combo, 2 of the decks that are faster in the format, and if you rely on 4-mana sweepers, you might potentially get run over. Absorb, probably this deck's best 3-mana counterspell, gain some life against the aggressive decks. Memory Deluge, probably your best card advantage spell. This competes with things like Dig Through Time, those kind of things, but this is the main one you'll see in the blue-white control lists. Shark Typhoon, sometimes you can hard cast this and then start making a bunch of sharks to win the game, but oftentimes this is just a cycle end-of-turn threat to put pressure on your opponent, pressure your opponent's planeswalkers, something that could otherwise give you a little bit of problems if they can resolve it through your counter spells. March of Otherworldly Light, we've already kind of talked about. This answers things at a little bit higher of a mana cost than, say, Get Lost does, but it does hit artifacts, enchantments, and creatures, whereas Get Lost hits creatures, planeswalkers, and enchantments. So a little bit of coverage there in terms of what you're hitting. In land base, you're playing a bunch of dual lands, another new one to the thing, Restless Anchorage, another slightly cheaper mana land than good old Hall of the Storm Giants up here. You have a couple copies of Aganjo, a couple copies of Ottawaru. Some of these lists you'll see different castles. You'll see Ardenvale and Vantress, both. And then you're playing as many dual lands as you can shove into the deck. Still playing enough basics so you can use your Field of Ruins. Field of Ruins help in matchups where maybe your opponent's not playing many basics. Maybe you can color screw them a little bit if they have, a 3, 4, 5 color deck. Maybe they're only playing 1 basic or so. Or against a deck you'll see in this video can help slow down Lotus Field combo. It doesn't stop them, but does help them slow down. Sideboard can be a various myriad of different things, as this is a blue-white X control deck. Narset's Reversal, this helps in Counterspell Wars, helps against cards like Thought Distortion that otherwise would be very problematic to deal with. Rest in Peace. You can potentially bring this in against Amalia to shut off their back end of their various get things out of the graveyard spells, but mainly this is for Izzet Phoenix and for Greasefang combo. Anything that's really trying to abuse the graveyard, also Neoform combo. Deck you don't see as much, but something you need to be aware of. Mystical Dispute for fighting the counterspell wars against Blue-White X control, potentially against Niv Delight, also against Izzet Phoenix, also against Lotus Field combo, also can come in against Spirits and Rogues, so quite a nice all-star to have in your thing when you're playing against a bunch of counterspell decks. Chrome Shark, this is an alternative win con. Basically, you start making tokens, then you can turn those tokens into actual creatures. Very similar to a smaller version of Shark Typhoon in that regard. Summary Dismissal, this helps against a lot of the uncounterable crap running around. Dromoka is very popular both in Lotus Field combo and Quintorius combo. You might also run into copies of Thought Distortion from some of the big mana decks like Lotus Field combo. This allows you to exile those. If your opponent happens to be playing any Eldrazi and say they're mono green ramp deck, those decks are a little less common, but does let you deal with both the Eldrazi and their triggers without any problems. Regal Caracal, this is one of the various different win cons you might see. You might see this, you might see the Big Angels, you might see Sternheim Unleashed, a few others that we'll take a look at in some of the other variants. And then Sunfall just as a supplementary sweeper to go with all the ones in your main deck. Yorion, this is one of 3 different configurations you might see, which is basically Yorion, which is 80 cards. Then you have Kahira, which basically means you're guaranteed to not be running any creatures in your main deck usually. And then you have just blue-white control with no companion. This one's Yorion. They're generally a little bit better against the grindy matchups, against, say, Rakdos midrange, Niv to light, any decks that are trying to go long, at the cost of not seeing the cards you want to see in specific matchups, like, say, Temporary Lockdown against Boros Convoke or Abzan Amalia. Configuration number 2 that we've already kind of talked about, and that is one with Kahira. Now, there's not a whole lot going on different with the main deck, other than the fact that you're seeing a lot less of other cards, although you are seeing one of the other alternative 2-mana counter spells. That is Censor. Now, Censor has the positive in that you can cycle it, but unlike Jawari Disruption, which can also be a land, this is just a cycler, helps you hit your land drops to a certain degree, can catch your opponent off guard, although if your opponent's playing around No More Lies or Make Disappear, Censor, it's okay, but it's more there because it can be a cycler in addition to a force spike. Rest of the thing, Hallowed Moonlight, this is primarily for Collected Company decks, keeping their Collected Companies and Court of Callings, especially out of the Abzan Amalia deck. Potentially have a deck like Merfolk that might be playing Collected Company, keeping them from having anything hit the battlefield. Rest of the deck we've already kind of talked about, although Dig Through Time supplementing Memory Deluge. This deck isn't the best at filling up the graveyards, so Dig Through Time isn't always an easy card to cast, but it does give you a much deeper selection than the front half of Memory Deluge, and gives you about the same look as Memory Deluge on the back half. Once again, though, this one's a little bit more vulnerable to graveyard hate, so you might be boarding this one out if you're boarding in Rest in Peace. Sideboard in this one, a little bit different. Dampening Sphere, this kind of helps with the Lotus Field matchup, which would have been great in the matchup that you'll be seeing. Hint, we're playing against Lotus Field in this video. But it helps against that, helps against Nykthos, helps to slow those decks down, which otherwise can be problematic. The rest of the cards, Sternheim Unleashed. Basically, this is a Foretell card that can make a bunch of angels. Casting 2 or 3 angels can be quite overwhelming against a lot of decks, especially if they're boarding out a lot of their creature-based removal. So, against decks like Rakdos, against decks like Niv to light, etc., it might be a little bit tricky for them to answer it. Shark Typhoon, we've already kind of covered. One card, Sinister Sabotage. The advantage of Sabotage over something like Absorb is you get a little bit more card selection with their Surveil, and you don't have to necessarily have a white mana up, although that's not usually a problem in this deck. But it is a counter spell. It gives you a little bit card selection as opposed to a little bit of life gain, so it's kind of up to you which one you think you want more. Final build we're going to take a look at, once again, not a whole lot going on. Deduce is an interesting one. This is a instant speed draw card that also investigates. So you get to draw 2 cards eventually, but one of them is a clue token, one of them is just a regular card draw. Kind of goes along similar lines to Omen of the Sea, a little bit of card selection, a little bit of, gives you a little bit of momentum as you're holding up your counter spells in the early turns. Search for Azcanta, not a one you'll usually see, but this gives you some card selection, and eventually if it flits over into Azcanta the Sunken Ruin, used to be very powerful when blue-white control was a little bit less options, but it is a fantastic 2-mana spell. Give you a little bit of card selection and choice early in the game. Once again, not really a whole lot different here in the main deck. But you do see 2 copies of Dream Trawler. This is a powerful card that you can slam against some of the aggressive decks. After you've swept their board once or twice, slam this card, kind of closes the game out, gains you some life, draws additional cards whenever it's attacking. Can be difficult to deal with because it's a 3/5. Also the fact you can discard a card to give it hexproof. Downside is you do have to tap it, so your opponent can potentially blank attack from it. But this can be a very difficult card for a lot of decks to answer. This deck is more frequently seen in the Lotus Field variants of Blue-White X Control that we're not covering in this video. We're just covering traditional Blue-White Control. But this is certainly a card you might see, especially out of those decks. The sideboard, you'll see some different ones in this version. most of these we've covered. Archon of Emeria. This has mainly got to be attacking Lotus Field. Lotus Field is a bit of an annoying deck because in a control versus ramp deck or a control versus control style deck, which Lotus Field can kind of border both sometimes depending on what it's trying to do in the post-board configs, it's who comes down to who can play more mana, and Archon really messes with their ability to cast multiple spells, and their deck is really predicated on spell after spell after spell after spell, sometimes them casting 8, 10, 12 spells in their combo turn to kill you. Ezreal, this is kind of, for lack of a better term, a poor man's Dream Trawler. It comes in, investigates twice, you can sacrifice an artifact to gain some life. Now, it plays a little bit cute with Deduce, but I'm not sure that this is better than some of the alternatives, but this person might have just been testing it to see how it was. And finally, Hullbreaker Horror. This is kind of the blue-white X or blue-red X control breaker. If this thing lands on the battlefield and it's not answered immediately before your opponent can, before you can hold up spells, or your opponent can hold up spells on whichever side it's on, basically this thing is nigh unkillable. And it makes your opponent's expensive spells very difficult to cast. This can really swing the tide against blue-white X mirrors, against the blue-red X creativity deck, and can even give things like Dragon Lord Dromoka fits, because if you're playing 2 mana, a cycle of Hallowed Moonlight, bounce your opponent's Dromoka, things are a lot worse for your opponent. But as far as blue-white X in the format, or blue-white control in the format, the deck has been solid for quite some time. It's been teetering on the top 5, but the thing that really pushed it to prominence is the pronounced presence of Abzan Amalia combo. This deck basically feasts on Amalia combo. I'm not saying Amalia combo can't beat it, but this is a deck that feasts on that. It gives somewhat fits to, Phoenix, because they run so few threats. You can generally run them out of threats in a lot of games. And with the right configuration, you can have a pretty good matchup against the Boros Convoke, Humans, and Soul decks that you'll see in the format, especially if you're running, the temporary lockdowns. If you're running, enough early interaction, those matchups can be pretty reasonable. The matchups that are tricky are Lotus Field combo, Rakdos Midrange. Lotus Field combo just can bully you with mana. They also play things like Dromoka in the post-board configs. They also play Thought Distortion. They can play Silence. There's a number of things that just mess with what you're doing very badly. And Rakdos is kind of the quintessential how to beat blue-white X control in post-board configs, and that is disruption, pressure, different forms of pressure. Basically, they can stack, Thought Seizes, Duresses, Go Blanks on top of Reckoner Bank Busters, Smugglers, Copters on top of Bloodtithe Harvester into Graveyard Trespasser into Shouldered. Basically, threats on their own that can threaten to win the game, backed by must counter discard spells combined with card advantage. It used to be they had to rely on planeswalkers, like Liliana, Chandra. Now with these Reckoner Bank Busters and Smugglers Copters, they just have this form of non-creature card advantage. Makes it very difficult to deal with. And obviously Farewell can clear up a lot of this, but, they're either able to play around it by only playing a threat or two into play, or they're able to take your Farewell before you can cast it. So game 1, you're generally pretty good against Rakdos, but the post-board configurations, it's absolutely terrible. I don't have enough experience with the Niv to Light variant, but Niv to Light tends to be a little bit lighter on the proper disruption and a little bit lighter on threats than, say, Rakdos or the blue-white X Mirror. So I do think blue-white's probably pretty reasonably set up in that matchup. That is blue-white control. Pretty good, solid rundown on what the deck's capable of against the top decks in the format. Let's get into our match to kind of show you how the deck plays out. Alright, showing a quick match with one of the variants of blue-white control, that being a Urion variant. We have Tell No Lies, a couple Shark Typhoon to cycle, and a Wandering Emperor. Seems like a good hand. I'm going to play the Pathway. I'm going to play probably Island into Plains for No More Lies. Key will be, does our opponent get something down on 1 before we can hold up No More Lies? Obviously, kind of a newer addition to the deck, but at least from the new set. But this looks like we might be up against a Malia combo. That's a little awkward. Oh, well, we'll play that on 3. So this usually indicates one of 3 decks. A Molia combo, Greasefang combo, and... Oh. Razor Verge Thicket Sylvan Scrying? I have no idea. Maybe a new variant of Azorius. Not Azorius. Lotus Field combo that's playing Razor Verge Thicket for some reason. Yep. Looks like that's at least theoretically what it is. Just go ahead and shock this in. Yep. Sure. Get some pressure down here. Especially with our lack of counter spells, we just want to maximize our pressure before they can find a Lotus Field. Sure. Okay. So, go ahead and play that. That way we can both Wandering Emperor and sure. Sharkle Typhoon. Yeah, Sharkle. Wow. I'm just sharkling this thing. Yep, yep. So 3, 4, 5, 9. If we attack with Hull, then we force them to chump. I think I'd rather be safe and hold up Dovin's veto. So. I think we just plan on Dovin's vetoing this. That's kind of annoying. Yeah, I don't think we let that happen. Alright, this looks like some of the variants of then I started picking up white lands to be able to cast Strict Proctor a little bit easier. Temporary lockdown, probably not the matchup for that. Definitely want the Summary Dismissal and the Mystical Disputes, as well as the Narset's Reversal. You could potentially consider the Rest in Pieces over some of the other stuff. Probably want the third copy of Get Lost. Hallowed Moonlight, not really. Could bring in the Chrome Sharks just as an earlier beatdown plan. They likely will have Dramoka, possibly Thought Distortion, in the post-board configs. Those out of there. Tremon Supreme Verdict. Don't want too many copies of Rest in Peace. Like, Rest in Peace is only specifically good against Lear, usually. I guess it's technically good against Balaget as well. Don't want to go down too many answers against Dramoka. So, no more lies. Omen in the Sea. Maybe it's just Trim Omen in the Sea. The fact that they're on the play this game is tremendously important for them to resolve something like Sylvan Scrying. If that's how they're relying on getting their copy of Lotus Field. Obviously, we can't keep this hand. The one-laner just isn't good enough. And I mean, I think we try it, but this hand is not good whatsoever. Voyaging Satyr. I think for now we hold up No More Lies and potentially cycle Get Lost. Nothing we can really do about that because No More Lies doesn't really do anything here. Just deal with Voyaging Satyr, get it out of the way. Got a land. It's not a good one, but it's a land. We have to cycle Shark Typhoon. Wow, I cannot say that today to save my life. Okay. Just going to be out man of this game, unfortunately. Yeah, this is when our deck just kind of starts beating up on control here. Sure. Kind of get to see what Lotus Field does while we're working on this. Sure. to see at least a little bit of what their post-board config is. Okay, so they do have Granite in their deck, which is important to know. Approach of the Second Sun. Okay, so they are a bit of an older configuration in the deck, it looks like. Balagat, Dark Petition. Okay. But Summary Dismissal, Farewell, Supreme Verdict. But yeah, a lot of this matchup kind of comes down to what blue-white versus Tron used to in the modern format. You're better off trying to keep them from ever assembling their combo rather than battlefield tapped. And there's battlefield tapped. I think we got them all in this one. Keep this one. Put back Supreme Verdict for now. Field of Ruin is nice, but it just makes their life a little more awkward. It's not like a guaranteed stop for what they're doing. So yep, that's a fairly easy get lost. Or No More Lies, not get lost. This is Mystical Dispute slash Portico. Bottom that, keep that one. I think we just take this opportunity to jam Turfluffle. Sure. Figured they would have copied Field of Ruin to deal with our Field of Ruin, but and we have a couple soft permission spells. The biggest problem we're going to have here is if they drop a Dramoka on our heads, then Okay. Continue to hold up Field of Ruin here. Definitely not untapping their land for them. They have no basic to get. That's not good for them. So that's them 1 mana. I feel like we have a Dermoka here in our future. I don't know what we could find here that would allow us to even have a prayer. Tell you what, the lands are not it. Mm-hmm. Of course, they have another Hidden Strings. I guess Thought Distortion. No, Porter of the Pages. Okay. Later. This is why silence is so annoying here. May as well just pass, since there's literally nothing we can do at this point. Problem when playing against Lotus Field is it's not like 100% guaranteed they can kill you from here. I mean, it's 99% sure, but there's always a chance that they don't find a particular card they're looking for. This looks like Omniscience. Mm-hmm. Alright, we're just dead to approach the second sun, so. Fun match, not really.